Metroid is one of my all-time favorite game series. It draws from so many of the things that I enjoy. With Metroid Dread right around the corner now, I've been replaying what I think are some of the best Metroid games ever made, and I decided to replay them in reverse order. Metroid Fusion was the first 2D Metroid game I ever played, but I've got Prime to thank for introducing me to the franchise. For these reasons, these two games stand out as some of my favorites. I've played them countless times. But it wasn't until this most recent playthrough of Fusion that something occurred to me. What if the Federation had plans far beyond their Metroid breeding lab on BSL? But first, let's take a quick look at Fusion's backstory so we can get some things sorted out. After the events of Other M, Samus is assigned to a security detail protecting a group of field scientists gathering samples of the wildlife from the surface of SR-388. The plan was to take the samples back to the Biologic Space Laboratories, or BSL, research station in the system, but before leaving the planet, one of the creatures attacked. After being dispatched by Samus, its biomass reformed into a wobbly blob that then rushed Samus and disappeared on contact. The mission was otherwise normal and concluded without further incident. However, while on her way back to BSL, Samus blacked out and lost control of her ship, which then crashed into a nearby asteroid cluster. Her escape pod was picked up by BSL and she was rushed off-station to Federation HQ. There it was determined that Samus had been infected by the X-Parasite, that wobbly blob she encountered on SR-388. The scientists aboard BSL had determined that the X-Parasite was the natural prey of the Metroids, and without any Metroids on SR-388, the parasite population exploded. Samus's infection was bad, requiring surgical removal of multiple pieces of her power suit. But even then it wasn't enough. The X-Parasite had spread to her nervous system far too deep to simply remove. But not all was lost. Some Federation scientists concocted a plan. They would use a Metroid cell culture grown from DNA recovered from the site of the final battle of Super Metroid to make an anti-X vaccine. Their plan worked. The vaccine was administered and Samus recovered. Although she inherited the Metroid's natural vulnerability to cold, she also gained the ability to absorb the X-Parasite while it's in its natural form. Samus was quickly sent back to BSL to investigate a report of a large explosion, where she found the quarantine bay had already been destroyed and the X-Parasite had overrun the station. After searching the station a bit, Samus discovered the cause of the explosion, herself, or rather an X-Parasite mimicking her, based on her DNA from the pieces of her power suit, complete with her full arsenal and memories. See, the X-Parasite survives by infecting their prey's nervous system and using that creature's own DNA to make more copies of itself. During this process, the host's memories are also copied, and an X-Parasite born from a host this way is then able to take on the physical appearance of that creature and use their memories and knowledge for self-preservation and hunting. This makes the X-Parasite extremely effective, especially so in its native environment. An environment like that of Sector 1, also known as SRX. This section of the station was made to be a near-perfect replica of the surface of SR-388, and the X here are propagating. Samus is sent into the sector to reset the atmosphere generators, which the X have overridden to produce more favorable conditions for themselves. She quickly completes the task and is directed to Sector 2, a tropical biome with thick vines and vegetation, where the computers detected an increasing number of X-Parasites. To aid Samus and increase her chances of survival, the Federation has sent an upgrade in the form of an upload that Samus can receive at a data room. Throughout her time on the station, the Federation sends a number of these upgrades, and Samus continues through the different sectors clearing up the X threat. Until she stumbles upon the restricted lab. Deep in the bottom of the station, down a dark cave in the nocturnal Sector 6, is a security gate guarded by a camera. When Samus first approaches, the camera spots her and starts an alarm that warns us there will be no entry without authorization. After a quick detour to take out the rampaging box robot and absorb the wave beam its core X wielded, Samus returns to the restricted lab and uses the aforementioned wave beam to open the gate. Beyond that gate is both an amazing scientific breakthrough and a dangerous secret. The Metroid breeding lab here has produced not only larval Metroids but also Alpha, Gamma, and Zeta Metroids, and even an Omega Metroid, all of which, other than the larva, were thought only to be able to mature on their home world of SR-388. Unfortunately for the Metroids, and SAX, and the Federation, Samus's entrance into the restricted labs allowed the X to follow, Sensing its natural enemy, an SAX started firing on the Metroids, breaking their containment and causing a failsafe to activate. 60 seconds after the alarm is triggered, the restricted lab is jettisoned from the station and destroyed in a massive self-detonation. When Samus arrives at the nearest navigation room to speak to her computer, it tells her that Sector 1 was built to facilitate Metroid breeding, but the Metroids here were to be used for peaceful purposes. It then goes on to tell her that the plasma beam and diffusion missile upgrades were withheld from her by the Federation because they've taken an interest in the SAX and were afraid Samus would defeat it if these weapons were added to her arsenal. Finally, her computer tells her that the Federation is taking over the mission, and orders her to remain in the navigation room until they arrive. A silent moment passes before Samus renegotiates her position and plans her next moves. At the suggestion of her computer, now going by its pre-brain upload name Adam, Samus will ascend the station to the control room and alter its orbit to collide with SR-388, while simultaneously activating the self-destruct sequence of the station, a plan that will culminate in the destruction of both BSL research labs and SR-388. After facing off against an SAX, Samus is able to successfully alter the station's trajectory and start the self-destruct sequence. She races back to the docking bay, faces off against an Omega Metroid, and finally absorbs an SAX and returns to full power, just in time to watch the fireworks. As she flies off, she contemplates the repercussions of disobeying orders and destroying the station and the planet. Alright, with that taken care of, let's get to theorizing. I think BSL Research Labs was being used by the Federation to research the X-Parasite, and that they orchestrated the events of the intro of the game in order to create an army of X-Parasite clones of Samus. We've seen before the Federation isn't above creating biological weapons. The bottle ship housed a Metroid breeding facility and the original Nightmare, with the one on BSL being an X-clone of the original's remains. Which leads me to another point. Nightmare isn't the only creature on BSL that Samus has fought before. There's also the Federation's clone of Ridley that Samus defeated on Battleship, and a number of creatures native to SR-388 and Zebus. These creatures I propose were chosen because of their history with Samus. They would be used to train the SAX and test its combat prowess. The other creatures, the ones that Samus hadn't faced before, were added to test how quickly the SAX could adapt to new situations that it had no inherited memories of. Similar logic explains the choice of environments on the different sectors of BSL. While Samus has definitely spent time in them all before, each one has been pushed to the extreme here. Sector 3 has rooms almost entirely submerged in magma. Sector 6 is almost as dark as Mount Moon, and the list goes on. The Metroids were to be the final test. Once the SAX reliably defeated Metroids and reversed their predator-prey relationship, they would prove themselves capable to the Federation. What the Federation didn't anticipate was the speed with which the SAX broke containment and took control of the station. Samus is obviously never told this, because the Federation would be admitting to willingly endangering her life in order to create bioweapons based on her DNA. They're fine with revealing their Metroid breeding program to her, after she's already discovered it, because it isn't too surprising considering Samus found the same thing on the bottle ship. The Metroids on BSL can also answer the questions of from where and how, with regards to the vaccine that was created for Samus. Now, I've got a couple more possible connections, but they're weak at best, so I'll let you decide whether they add any weight to the theory or not. The first one being that Sector 1, the replicated environment of SR-388, is labeled SRX. The X here is probably just being used in place of the number 388, like a variable, in order to keep the character count of the label at 3, just like the other sectors, but it could be here to indicate that the sector was built with the X-Parasite in mind. The other possible connection I have is that the Chozo statue may have been included to test the SAX's compatibility with Chozo technology. The Federation certainly has the mission reports from Samus's previous journeys and knows how advantageous the Chozo statues have been for her. So to sum it all up before the end, the Federation discovered the X-Parasite on SR-388 and began researching it on Biologic Space Laboratories Research Station. After discovering its capabilities, the Federation concocted a plan to lure Samus to SR-388 and stage an attack by an X-Parasite, infecting her in the process. This they knew would leave her comatose and unable to protest the surgical removal of her power suit. But because they were acutely aware of the potential for failure, they had the anti-X vaccine ready to bring Samus back from the brink. This would ensure their most valuable asset didn't succumb to the infection. The pieces of her power suit would be sent to BSL, where the resulting SAX would be trained and tested in a range of environments and against an array of enemies. What they didn't plan for was the uncontrollable nature of the SAX. Well, what do you think? Am I off my rocker, or might there be something here? Maybe you've got your own theory? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see what you have to say. And with that, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're eager to see the next. Thanks for tuning in.